Welcome back. So now we're going to start chapter 12, which is about probability. And what probability is really like what's the chance of something occurring? And for the chance of something occurring, we need to know how many different ways can something occur. So for instance, I'll start with a simple example of flipping a coin. When you flip a coin, you really have two different options, right? You could get a heads or you could get a tails. So there's two possible things that can happen. So if I said, for instance, what's the probability, which I'll use P for denoting probability, of getting heads? Well, we know that heads is one of the two sides of the coin. So to determine a probability, you always get what you want over the total possible. Well, in flipping a coin, finding the amount, that total possible, there's two sides to a coin. Very, very easy to find. But in the problems that we're going to be doing in this book, sometimes it's very difficult to find the total possible. How many ways can something occur? So what we need to do is practice our counting techniques. And to practice our counting techniques, that's the study of combinatorics. Combinatorics is the way that you count how many different ways can something happen. So how many ways can something happen is called an outcome. For instance, if you roll a die, there's 6 possible outcomes. So they list it using our roster notation with the braces that we used earlier this semester and the commas between each element. Remember, technically the order doesn't matter and never repeat elements in this list. So let's take a look at these first two examples. The first example says list and then count the number of different outcomes that are possible when one letter from the word Tennessee is chosen. So if we pick a letter, what's our different possibilities? Well, it could be any of the letters from the word Tennessee. Once again, we're going to write our answer in roster method. It could have been a T, an E, an N, or an S. Those are our different possible outcomes. So the question then becomes, how many outcomes are there? In other words, we're looking for the cardinality of that set T, E, N, S. If you remember, the notation for cardinality was an N. This comes from the set chapter that we did earlier this semester. So how many elements are in this set? There's 4 elements in that set. Again, never repeat letters. So let's try it on Check Your Progress on number 2. It says, what are the possible outcomes if you choose one letter from the word Mississippi? Well, it could have been an M, an I, an S, or a P. Again, how many different possible outcomes are there? There are 4 distinct possible outcomes. So, when we do something, what do we call it? We call it in mathematics in this chapter, we're going to call it an experiment. An experiment is when you do something, roll a die, flip a coin. What can happen is called your sample space. So for instance, we picked one letter from the word Tennessee. Picking a letter from Tennessee was our experiment. The sample space was T, E, N, and S. Okay. An event is what happens when you actually pick the letter. What do you want to occur? So for instance, I might want to know what's the probability of me flipping a heads. A heads would be an event. An event is one of the outcomes in the sample space. It's one of the possible things that could happen.